You're listening to the Shift Work Podcast, episode 45. Today, we're discussing brain science as it applies to the art of negotiation. I share with you 3 biases that you must satisfy before you can begin to shift the beliefs of anyone that you intend to negotiate with. So stay tuned. Hi, I'm Luke Lehman, and you're listening to the only podcast for high-growth entrepreneurs rooted in business strategy and tactics as we discover the habits of high-performance leaders and dive deep into brain science. With over 2 decades leading high-performance teams, from fighter pilot to CEO, I'm excited to join you in your entrepreneurial journey. Shift the mindset needed to build your empire, keep more money in your pocket, and enjoy every day of the journey. Welcome to Shift Work. Hey, my friends, welcome back to another episode of the Shift Work Podcast. Today, we're taking on negotiation, and I'm going to introduce to you 3 key ideas that you can begin to apply today in any negotiation that you do. Now, whether that's negotiating with a key business partner, a vendor, a customer, your children, changing the way that you think and the way that you negotiate is a critical skill in all of your life. And you don't have to take my word for it. But I can guarantee you that some of the greatest wins of your life have come on the heels of some of your best negotiation. If I'm being honest, I say that negotiating with my children is one of the hardest things that I do in my life. It's just near impossible for me to try to get the same frame as them, to be able to understand the world as they see the world. And more importantly, to get them to be able to see the world through my lens, which is really all that negotiation is about getting someone to be able to see through a common lens. It's your window to the world. But if I'm being very critical, negotiating with children isn't actually the hardest thing. It's negotiating with myself about thinking about something that might be more beneficial for me, or being willing to throttle back on something or turn up the heat on something else. So today we're going to get into negotiation, but this is not negotiation 101. This gets into some heavy brain science about how you can apply some bias, some awareness of the way that others think about the problems that they solve, and then use 3 key techniques to be able to apply those into your own negotiation skills. And I'm reminded this summer of my own failures of negotiation. One of the key components of my life that I'm really, really bad at is knowing when I am sick. Knowing when my body is actually telling me that you're having an immune response, that you need to slow down, that you need to now focus on your health instead of something else. So I talk about living with intentional alignment as being the balance of health, wealth, and relationships. But oftentimes, I can't see my own shortcomings. It's the whole reason why you need a coach. That's the whole reason why you need someone else that can show up in your life as a mirror or a flashlight. For me, a lot of times in my health, it's my wife. She can see it long before I can. So after 2 years of battling COVID and it running rampant in the United States, we have now finished the 4th bout of COVID in our house. It has managed to make its way all the way through our family. And what's interesting about that is that it didn't actually make it through all at once. My daughter got it first in the spring, and I wouldn't say that we gave it a whole lot of credence. We didn't actually curtail the way that we cared for her as if she had the flu or a stomach bug or COVID. We continued to care for her and provide for her. And I don't even recall if we wore masks or not. It doesn't really matter. But the point is, we didn't get it. In July of this year, after traveling to a speaking engagement in Nashville, Tennessee, I came back, and I'll spoil the surprise, I had COVID. But I didn't know it. On Friday, I thought that I might be a little bit off. On Saturday morning, I woke up and made an attempt at a 5-mile run. Now, to be fair, in Charleston, in South Carolina, in summer, in 95 degrees and 95% humidity, a 5-mile run isn't always easy and it doesn't always feel great. But I didn't make it. I got to the 3 or 4 mile mark and I couldn't do it. My chest was condensed or compressed or however you want to say. I couldn't get a deep breath. I couldn't finish the run. So I walked back and I came home and I felt depleted and low on energy, and I blamed it on not having enough diet, enough rest, enough preparedness to be able to run. I blamed it on the humidity, but in all actuality, I had COVID. I still didn't know it yet. On Sunday morning, I slept until I think it was like 9 o'clock or something, which is uncanny for me. So I woke up and I said, all right, something's amiss here. And I took a COVID test, and surely enough, I had COVID. But what's important to that is that my wife actually knew that long before I did. She knew that something was amiss because she could see in me something that I could not see in myself. How often does that happen for you? That someone else can see it in you first before you can see it in yourself? Can you imagine like a little thermostat on your own life that just says, here's the status. Here's what's going on with you today. Check in on your phone and you see this is the status of your life. You are at 90% health. You are hungry. You are tired. You slept well. Go do this, eat that, apply this amount of energy, focus on this. Of course not. That would be nice for us to be able to have that thermostat, but we don't. We do have that in others, and that's the key portion of negotiation, is that I continue to try to negotiate with myself. I try to tell myself that I am okay, that I am able to go run 5 miles, that my body is in peak physical condition at all times, when in reality, it's actually time for a slowdown. So gaining an awareness of where you need to be able to see a more broad view of the world, to be able to apply a different perspective, is key to winning. So we're going to get today into how we negotiate with others. But what I'm going to tell you today has as much application about your own view, your own reality strategy, your own map of the world, the way that you perceive things, having an understanding of your own biases, your own learning patterns, your own decision-making skills. Because when you can understand your own, you can now use them as a lever with other people. A lot of what we talk about on the Shift Work podcast has to do with brain science because it has an application in all components of your life. It has an application of becoming the future best version of you. It has an application in persuading and influencing those around you. It has an application in your business. It has an application in all components of your life, but you cannot have one without the other. You cannot focus on your business without focusing on yourself. And to say that what happens on the outside is simply a reflection of what happens on the inside would be the greatest understatement that I could make today. So as you listen today, I encourage you to listen for how you can apply these skills in your own life, but also how you can apply them in negotiation. What's interesting as I explore these concepts with you and I teach you the skills necessary to be a high performer, you're going to find that you can actually use these in a manipulative fashion. It is very easy for you to be able to apply the skills to convince or coerce others to do something that may not be in their best interest. Part of what I'm going to tell you today has an ethics component, an integrity component, that you're going to use it for good. That your map, your view of the world is indeed more broad, that it is serving at the benefit of others. And it goes back to this relationship with my children. There are many times that I tell them to do something. There is no negotiation to stop running in front of traffic, to go to sleep, to eat better, because I know from a more broad perspective that it's in their best interest and it is serving their highest needs. But it doesn't mean that they can see it. So today we're going to spend some time getting out of our own way, and we're going to look into a more broad view of the world. There's three key components that we're going to get into before we get into the application to negotiation. The first is having an understanding of confirmation bias. And it's one of the most obvious bias that you see in all of the world. The confirmation bias is simply the tendency to interpret new evidence as confirmation of your own existing beliefs or theories. Why? People don't want to feel wrong. You don't want to get to this phase of your life and to find out that everything that you knew to be true no longer is the full story. I'm not saying that it's a lie, and I'm not saying that it's inaccurate. I'm just saying that it's incomplete. That perhaps that concept that we learned as teenagers or young adults has a different application now, has a different implication in our business, in our own lives, in the way that we solve problems. So this confirmation bias, the tendency to interpret the new evidence as confirmation of one's existing beliefs or theories, is one of the hardest biases to break because people believe that they are right. Now, to caveat, I'm only talking to high performers. I'm not talking to people on the street struggling for their next meal. Though true, I don't believe that they're getting into this level of understanding about negotiation. So what do we do with confirmation bias? We can use it as a lever to help apply pressure against a concept using their own beliefs or theories. I talk all the time about our BS. Our belief systems are the way that we hold our reality together. We make an observation about something we see in the environment, and then we form a belief that holds together that reality, and then we back that up and hold that reality together with stories. And that's where the confirmation bias comes in. We tell ourselves the stories to hold together our belief systems that put the foundations in for the way that we view the world. And then we look for evidence in our society, in our world around us, in our environment that backs that up. Confirmation bias is one of the hardest things for us to break. And I'll tell you this because you see it all the time, is when someone Googles something at this point. If I Google a question that has a presupposition, can cigarettes cause cancer? I'm going to get an answer that confirms what I already believe. Is it possible that cigarettes do not cause cancer? And I'll get a Google article that confirms what I already believe. Google is like the enemy of confirmation bias, or I guess maybe an advocate. Maybe it's the ally of confirmation bias. It tells you what you already want to believe. So when we use that in the negotiation components, I'm going to help someone to make slow shifts using what they already believe, and I'm going to make slow movements to move them into a more broad view. So having an understanding of the confirmation bias is an important foundation for the way that we negotiate. It's also, admittedly, one of my highest frustration points. When I coach or teach or mentor or communicate or engage with friends, have conversations with my family, it is so hard for me now to suspend disbelief when I know that what they're saying isn't the whole truth. And to caveat that with not to say that they're out of integrity, not to say that they're actively telling me a lie, but to just understand that the way that they perceive the world isn't the entirety, isn't the whole picture. And when I can see that they're looking for ways to hold their reality together, I want to give that to them. I want to help them satisfy their need to feel right. If you're not familiar, Blair Warren did some great work on persuasion and influence. And here's what Blair Warren says: the 7 things that people need. Number 1, people need to feel needed. 2, When aware of an impasse, people will do anything to gain a sense of hope. Number 3, people need a scapegoat. Number 4, people need to be noticed and feel understood. Number 5, people need to know things others don't know or that they aren't supposed to know. Number 6, people need to feel right. And number 7, people need to feel a sense of power. And if you were to believe in a more broad view of the world, that those 7 conditions that Blair Warren put out and that were well researched, that those are human needs, and I can satisfy those human needs, I can now use the confirmation bias to say things like, you are correct. And the reason you are correct is, and then I use that as the entry point because I want to satisfy their need to feel right. I want to satisfy their need to feel a sense of power. So I use that confirmation bias as an advocate, as affirmative action for me to say yes, and, or yes, and what else could also be true. That way, I'm not discrediting the way that they perceive the world, but I'm simply adding an alternative view. I'm adding a more broad perspective that, when considered, is going to move them just a little bit closer to the way that I view the world. So the next bias that we're going to become aware of is optimism bias. This optimism bias refers to our tendency to overestimate our likelihood of experiencing positive events and underestimate our likelihood of experiencing negative events. Is it true? Of course it's true. I just told you that I didn't believe that I had COVID, despite fatigue, despite knowing that my body was giving me feedback contrary to the worldview that I had an overarching desire for positivity. Again, understanding that people want things to work out. People are not going to enter into negotiation with you because they want something to hurt or because they want to feel pain or to suffer. They believe that entering into that negotiation is going to enhance their positive experiences, and they have a bias, ever so slightly, towards the optimistic side. They believe it's going to work out. If you're making a new offer on a home, you believe it's going to work out and it's going to make your life better. If you're selling your home, you believe it's going to make your life better to sell that home. When we bias towards positive events, you can use that in your negotiation strategy so that you can allow them to have the big wins. Confirmation bias, optimism bias, and then the third is egocentric bias. It's the tendency to rely too heavily on one's own perspective and have a higher opinion of oneself than reality. It doesn't sound too far off of confirmation bias, does it not? Confirmation bias is looking for the things that you believe to be true and then to hold that together with other anecdotal pieces of evidence, research, science, findings, your friends' opinions, surrounding yourself with a network of people that are going to confirm what you believe to be true. Frankly, it's just too painful not to be, right? If I were to identify as an entrepreneur, as a father, as an athlete, and then I were to go surround myself with people that found themselves to be drug addicts, low performers, obese, Alcoholics Anonymous, I would find myself out of good company. I would find myself surrounded by people who were not confirming what I believed. This egocentric bias is the tendency to rely on your own perspective. So it's not the component of looking for confirmation. It's just weighing your own life experiences higher than someone else's or what may be true. Again, I can't separate the two. I can't tell you that the way that you view the world is incorrect. because the way that you view the world is your reality. It's the grand sum of your life's events. It's the box. It's your window into the world that you see. But you can see it as I apply it to my own children. You can see that at 41 years old, that I have a more broad view of the world. Good, bad, hard to say. It's just different. And potentially it's more broad. So as we move into the actual application into negotiation, I told you this was not going to be basic negotiation skills. This is heavy brain science to have an understanding of how people hold their reality together. So let's now look at a couple of the foundations for how we apply it to negotiation. There are 3 steps to negotiation that I'll share with you that are foundational, and you likely already know them, but we're going to apply these bias against these. The first, build a common fact base. Number 2, think outside your own box. And number 3, think win-win. When we build a common fact base, this is why we talk so much about rapport building, is because I want to be able to set a foundation for what you know and what I know. And I want to find those commonalities of where my reality confirms your reality, or where my reality can set an optimistic future, or when my reality can validate your feelings, your emotions, your perspectives. Do you see how I haven't yielded at all? I'm just looking for the foundations that apply to your biases. And when I'm able to do so, when I'm able to see the world closer through your lens, now I'm able to figure out what motivators you're going to have. I'm going to be able to see what drivers that you have. It's so easy. It's so easy. I talk about it, real estate, car sales. Nobody ever asks the questions to be able to get to a common foundation of what motivates you, which is why I spend 90% of the time in any negotiation getting an understanding of the way that you hold your reality together before any sales pitch, before I get into my story, before I get into the features and benefits. I want to understand how you are holding your reality together. And then I'm going to help you by showing you that everything that you care about also matters to me. I'm going to confirm for you. In building a common fact base, I'm going to confirm for you that the way that you view the world is also shared by me. If people have a desire to bias their decisions as confirmations of what they already believe to be true, I'm going to help them. Think about this. If you're buying a house and you walk in and you say, the home is beautiful, I can understand why you valued it at $500,000, $1.5 million, $4.5 million. Did you discredit your own negotiation skills yet? Or did you only help confirm what they already believed to be true? Notice the specificity in the way that I choose my words. I can see how you, I understand how. If I were you, I'm putting the onus back on them in all conditions to only validate the way that they see the world. By building this common base of facts, I'm attempting to step into your window into the world to be able to make the decisions based on the way that you make decisions. Now, as a skilled negotiator, I'm going to move you out of those biased positions. But I'm going to do it very intentionally, and I'm going to give you 3 very varsity techniques that you're going to be able to apply today to move someone away from their positions. So in building this common fact base, again, I'm going to play into the optimism bias. I'm going to help them see that in their decision-making, there is an eventuality of a positive experience, because I know that they wouldn't be selling their house. I know that they wouldn't be on a car lot. I know that they wouldn't be seeking services that I might sell them if they didn't believe that it was going to move them to some version of pleasure. And then finally, I'm going to play into their egocentric bias. In building a common fact base, I'm going to have an understanding that they want to rely heavily on their own perspective. I'm just going to help clarify what their perspective actually is. Now, one of the favorites, if you haven't read it, is Socratic Selling, written by Kevin Daly. And I'll link it up in the show notes, but it's an absolute must for negotiation and sales. In Socratic Selling, I'm just going to ask more questions. I'm going to be more curious to help understand how you put together a common fact base. And then when I can understand, I can now help you to think outside your own box. And the final component of negotiation is thinking win-win, is for you to be able to win without me losing, for me to be able to win without you losing. And then we can get into the whole world of BATNA and some of the other conditions of negotiation that you're likely already familiar with. And if you're not, that's called the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And you can give it a Google. But most simply is for us to be able to think win-win. So now that I have this understanding of the way that you see the world, I can use the Socratic selling method to be able to understand and then to discredit. And that's where we're going to get into the real meat of today's episode, is the discredit component. The Socratic method will go through a few different components. First, clarifying concepts. What exactly does this mean? I'm looking for specificity. How does this relate to what we have been talking about? Can you give me an example of what that might look like? Next is probing assumptions. What else could we assume? What else might be possible? What would happen if? Or probing rationale. Why is that happening? What evidence is there to support what you are saying? I want to understand how you hold your reality together. And when I can understand it, I can now move it. And I'm going to move it ever so slightly. Little moves, little moves, little moves. One of the ways that I do that is by using a technique called redefine. As I redefine, I pick a specific word choice that I may believe to be somewhat limiting, and I ask you to gain agreement with another word. I redefine it. It's not a matter of X, it's a matter of Y. If X, could it also be Y? Are you angry or are you frustrated? If you're not frustrated, could you be disappointed? If you're not disappointed, could you be saddened? If you're not saddened, could you be inconvenienced? Do you see how I moved all the way from something that's heavy? I am furious that we haven't been able to get to the end of this transaction. Is it a matter of being furious or frustrated? You see how I moved it just a little bit? And I'm looking for them to gain agreement. And I may not be able to move it all the way from frustrated to enthusiastic or frustrated to excited, but I can move them ever so slightly by my ability to redefine the words for them. And in gaining agreement, I'm asking them to simply use more of their words. A lot of what I talk about on this show has to do with the way that you perceive the world as much as what you can do in your business. And frankly, I know a lot of folks that listen to this show aren't actually into business yet. It may be simply that you want to be a better human, and that business is a belief that you have that will help you to get there. So I don't want to discredit you today, but the majority of the people that listen to this show are already successful in business. They have already found the skills to be successful. They already have the confirmation of their beliefs. They know that they can be successful, and they're looking to become a better version of themselves. This redefined strategy is a phenomenal negotiation tool. What if I want to strengthen someone's emotion? What if in the negotiation, what if we're looking for this common framework and I can move them now from something that's a weaker emotional state to something that's stronger? What if I'm selling cars and I say something like, What do you feel about the safety of this? And they go, I think I like it. Do you believe the safety features are commensurate with your desires? I think they meet their expectations. What if I now strengthen that? What if I now look for something like meeting expectations and I say, can you envision a time where this might have more application? Or do you think that this would keep your children safe? I'm looking for ways that I can strengthen that single emotion, that feeling, and I redefine it from a word that is less strong to something that has more gravitas. See what I did? I'm moving ever so slightly towards what I want you to believe. I'm changing your feelings and your thoughts. I am satisfying the bias, but I'm moving you ever so slightly using specific language patterns. Can you begin to see how you can apply it in your own negotiation, in your own business, in your own life? Perhaps it's even negotiating with yourself, of saying today's not going to be a great day. I am frustrated today. And moving it ever so slightly. Am I frustrated or am I just a little disappointed? The second language pattern that I use is changing frame size. Now, I want you to imagine with me for a moment, you're looking very narrow at a fish, and the fish appears to be swimming rather aggressively through the ocean. And I ask you to change the frame size. Instead of making it an 8.5 by 11, you make it an 11 by 17. And you see, as you've zoomed out slightly, that there's another bigger fish chasing the smaller fish. And you go, well, that makes sense. I see now that the smaller fish is running away from a much more aggressive fish. Of course, you see the world more broadly. And now if I ask you to change the frame size again, now you're looking through a big 60-inch TV and you see that the small fish is indeed running from the large fish, but it's because the large fish is running away from an extra large fish. It changes the story a little bit. The middle fish isn't as aggressive now because it's also running away from the large fish, extra large fish. And if I were to ask you to take a much more global perspective, to change the frame size to be very large, and I show you a shark on top of the ocean, and the shark is swimming around, and this extra large fish is now running away from the shark. So none of the three original fishes are chasing anyone. They're all running away from something. And the irony of all of this is the shark isn't looking for fish to eat. It's looking for sea lions. You see, we change the frame size. You go, I see. I have a bigger perspective. I have a bigger perspective. I have a bigger perspective. So when I ask someone to look at a more broad view of the picture, oftentimes you think about it like this and you say, I'd like for you to look at the value proposition of buying this house. And what happens is people see the price tag on the house and they say, I can't see how that would work for me today. But I don't want them to see how it would work for them today. I would want them to see how it would work for them over the course of a year. This is one of the reasons why it's so effective for car dealers to not talk about the price of a car. They don't talk about the fact that it's $100,000. They talk about a monthly payment. Or perhaps when you're negotiating in that emotional state, maybe it's a $50,000 car, $40,000 car, and they say, it's not the price of the car that you're looking for, it's the monthly payment. You see what I did there? That's actually a redefine. I actually moved them from the total price of the car into a monthly payment. I redefined for them. But in doing so, I also changed the frame size. People do it all the time. You see it now, yes? You see, for the cost of a cup of coffee a day, you can affect the lives of children around the world. I've changed your frame size. I've asked you not to look at the whole picture. I've asked you to look at a smaller portion of the picture. So changing frame size is a beautiful reframe of the ability to have someone to think smaller or to think bigger. And it's to think in a mechanism that's more aligned with what you want them to see or to believe. So imagine my map of the world adjacent to your map of the world, and we're looking for some commonality or overlay into the picture. By changing the frame size, I can ask you to see a little bit more broadly. Now, we can apply it to all kinds of complex situations. When we're negotiating, I can change the frame size with my children to say, well, let's not think about today. Let's think about it over the course of the week. Is it that I never let you have candy, or is it that I never let you have candy this minute, or this day, or this week, or this month? Is it that I never let you go to a friend's house today, or this minute? I said you can go this afternoon. I'm just saying you can't go right now. You see how I'm changing the frame size? I'm moving it. Now let's move it toward a more complex negotiation. Let's say that you're trying to implement a new service package. You're trying to negotiate with someone and they're stuck on price. Of course they're stuck on price. They're always stuck on price. I talk about this often in thinking about a total investment. Yes, there's a number that if you were to acquire the services for 12 months, 24 months, 36 months, you are going to pay that. But that's not the milestone. You're going to get a result after you make the first payment. And I deliver the first service, the second payment, second service, third payment, third service. And I've changed the frame size because I want them to look smaller. I want them to look at the micro wins. I say this all the time when we talk about hiring new employees. Business owners say, I don't have $160,000 to be able to pay that employee. Well, the good news, my friend, is they're not collecting on $160,000 on day one. Matter of fact, they're going to come work for you for 2 weeks first before you're going to ever pay them the first paycheck. And then you're only going to pay them 1/24 of their total salary. And when I tell you that, you go, yeah, it's true. They're going to give me 2 weeks worth of work and I'm only going to pay them 1/24 of their total salary. I've changed the frame size. The third and final technique that I use is called model of the world. And model of the world is a super interesting technique because it allows someone to think through the eyes of someone else. Now, here's the technique. The technique is simple. It's now asking them to think about how someone else would think about this situation. There's two ways to do this. The first is to pick someone common in the industry that they might look up to and ask them to think about how that person would consider the same transaction. And it's often a good technique because they can see it and they say, well, sure. It's also a little bit dangerous because they would begin to discredit it because they would say, this wouldn't work for me. Of course it would work for you, Luke. You have money, you have success, you have influence, you have power, you have already had all the success, you have been a fighter pilot, but that wouldn't work for me. Now, what I happen to believe is true is that if it would work for me, it would work for you. But sometimes it's too far of a reach to pick a third person. If that entry point doesn't land, here's the most beautiful way to do this, is to ask them to think about either a past version of themselves or a future version of themselves. So now it's like taking a second person view. If I were to tell you that Blair Warren has 7 steps, one of those steps being that people need a scapegoat, what if that scapegoat is simply moving away from me as the person making the decision today and thinking towards a future version of that? It's a very varsity skill, but here's the way this would look. Let's just say that we go here together, that you and I agree that you're going to enter this program with me or you're going to consume this service. Let's just fast forward a month. Let's fast forward 6 months. Let's go a year into the future where this is already complete. And I want you to describe for me what utopia would be. If I do exactly what I'm supposed to do and you pay exactly what you were supposed to pay, what would the definition of success be like? Or conversely, let's go back into the past. Let's go back a year and let's look at this same problem. Can you imagine even that you would have been considering this solution at a version 1 year ago today? Let's go back to that person 1 year ago and let's ask that person what they would have been most afraid of or about why they would have delayed this decision. You see what I did there? I've elicited their highest values. I've asked them to tell me what's the most important thing for them, but I have allowed them to have a scapegoat because it's not them that is talking to me. It's the previous version of them or the future version of them. And now I can elicit that highest value. They can tell me what that old person would have been afraid of or what that new person would be excited about without them having to feel like they're giving up the ghost. So if I were to ask you, what are you most excited about? Imagine that you go into the future with me. Today is 1 year from now. And we look back together and you said, I am most excited about the things that happened in my life because of this. I am most proud of these actions or these experiences or these outcomes. I now can listen for the key words and the key values that are the drivers for you about what you are optimistic about. 3 subtle changes, 3 simple shifts, 3 language patterns that you can use to be able to apply right now into any negotiation. I can go back to my children, I can go back to myself, and I can use these tools of redefinition, changing the frame size, changing the model of the world, allowing them to take a different view of the same situation by moving simply along their own timeline. My friends, I want you to keep winning. I am here today to share with you the secrets to success that you can apply immediately in your life, that you can take into practical application so that you can succeed, so that you can win, so that you can have greater successes, greater income, greater experiences, greater freedom. But I know that I can't do this alone. And it would mean the world to me if you would share this episode with someone that could also have the same experiences that you've had, that can open their world to broader possibilities. Perhaps it's a business associate, perhaps it's a vendor, perhaps it's even a customer that you can help share with them. I know it's hard, but my friends, we can all win together. You do not have to hide this from your customers because you believe that it has to be a win-lose situation. Tell them. Give them the secrets. Let them share with you in your own journey of the world. And if you can't get there yet today, at least share it with someone on your team. Share it with someone that can take the application today into their own life and make big changes, big decisions, and better choices. I hope you have a great week, my friends. Remember, this is your championship life, and there are no practice days. I'll see you right back here next week for another episode of the Shift Work Podcast. Thanks for listening. If you found value in today's episode, please take the time to leave a review so that we can build our community of high-growth entrepreneurs. If you'd like to stay connected with me, go to www.lukelehman.com to find a link to your social media channel of choice.